The good news is you don't need a monster database to implement major gifts fundraising. What you do need is a right-sized, well-organized database that isn't too complicated, that supports your fundraising strategies and the work of your fundraisers. In this tutorial, I'm going to share what I consider to be the must-have codes for a major gifts implementation, and I can almost guarantee that your software product will accommodate these codes. You might have to customize a few, but everybody is capable of having a targeted, customized cultivation and solicitation communication program and a prospect pipeline from discovery to stewardship of gifts. So let's take a look at these magical codes.
I've grouped codes into 3 functional categories: global codes, major donor indicators, and cultivation cycle codes. First, we have global codes. I call them global because any database, not just a major gift system, should be implementing them. Entity type is the broadest category of your constituent records. The most important report for this data point is the source of funding report, so I recommend modeling your value list by how you think of your funding sources. Typically, these are individuals, foundations, corporations, government agencies, or affiliate organizations. The field affiliation comes in many different names, depending on what system you're using. You may track this data point as a group, or an attribute, or in Razor's Edge, it could be the second level constituency code. Whatever it's called in your system, this is where you identify how the constituent is affiliated with your organization. Common values are board, former board, staff, patient, parent, alumni, volunteer. And though each industry has its most common set of affiliations, this list really is particular to each individual organization. Communication codes. These are the do nots: do not mail, do not solicit, do not contact. The do's, or what do you send to the constituent, are tracked elsewhere in the system. Use communication codes specifically to exclude records from communications. Inactive deceased. There is a database management rule that you should never delete a record from your database. This is to ensure that those individuals or organizations that every year a board member or a fundraiser says should be giving you money but simply won't, doesn't keep coming up in your system for qualification. It's also useful for reporting purposes, as it allows you to analyze how long on average you communicate with a prospect before receiving a gift, or report on previous gifts from now inactive or deceased donors. So always have these codes available so that you can exclude inactive and deceased individuals from a mailing and still keep them in your database as archival data. And finally, campaigns, funds, and appeals. This triplet gets its own tutorial, but every fundraising system should address on some level of detail the overarching fundraising efforts, specific solicitation appeals, and the funds into which donations are categorized. Again, the terms for these will vary from system to system. Now let's get to the major gift specific codes. Prospective and current major donors are segmented by 3 indicators: capacity, connection, and demonstrated behaviors. Capacity is measured by wealth ratings, which you can import directly from your screening or you can customize. Giving to other organizations applies capacity as well as inclination, which, as we all know, is a critical characteristic of a major donor profile. Depending on what wealth screening service you're using, the giving to others rating may not be as neat as the wealth rating and may require a little manipulation of your screening results before importing them into your file, but it's worth it. Influence is another underutilized rating, where a high influence rating indicates a broad and active civic engagement, another common major donor characteristics. The 3 capacity-related codes I've just mentioned are often provided via a wealth screening process, but remember, your own or your organizational knowledge about a constituent always trumps a screening rating. Women, especially the older generation of women, are shockingly undervalued in wealth screenings, but we all know how powerful, influential, and generous they are in their communities. For all of these ratings, have a method for updating a rating, either as an internal rating source that shows a higher level of validation, or create a checkbox so that you can indicate that this rating has been internally verified. The second indicator, connection, is recorded through relationships, the source of a prospect, for example, was this person recommended by a board member? Did they attend an event? And known giving interests. I emphasize known interest as a caution against assigning an interest based on a response to an appeal. The giving interest field should be used to target communications and appeals, not create a mailing list. Track those programs or communication interests someplace else and use this as a very targeted, strategic data point based on verified intel that will inform a specific solicitation. And finally, the engagement indicators, which are often populated as a matter of business, such as entering a gift or recording event attendance. One tip for tracking engagement is to be clear about what points of engagement express the greatest level of interest and be sure you are differentiating between these and the more common points of engagement. An example of this might be a donor initiating an email requesting information on a specific project versus a fundraiser including a donor in a special update mailing. Both are points of engagement, but the donor-initiated communication is a far better indicator of interest. The last set of must-have codes are related to the cycle of cultivation, and they form the basis of a prospect pipeline in workflow management. These codes work better the more simplified the system is. Stages of cultivation refer to the famous litany: prospecting, discovery, qualification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. This is where I strongly recommend simplicity. Activate only those stages for which you have a specified course of action defined. Donor strategy. Somewhere on every donor or prospect record, please, please, please have one single note or description field that provides a simple but up-to-date narrative on the individual or organization. Imagine you were asking the president of the board to meet with this donor and record here exactly what you would say by way of background and introduction. In fact, if you choose one single code from this magical list, choose this one, because applied well, it can capture, not in an elegantly reportable way, but in a bottom line, you can reference it in order to make an appropriate ask sort of way, all of the major donor codes. Target. You don't have to use a proposal or grants management module to record your aspirational ask amount for your major donor. Depending on your fundraising strategy and how you're using your system, this target may represent your specific annual ask, or it may represent the combined value of all solicitations in a single year, or the aspirational value of a donor over a period of time, such as over the course of a 5-year campaign. I will typically define the use of this field based on how it best supports a gift pyramid projection, which varies from organization to organization based on their current fundraising strategy. I'm sure I talk about this exhaustively in some other tutorial, but for now, suffice it to say that an assignment field can be used to assign primary responsibility, yes, but also specific solicitation assignments such as grant writing, alumni appeal, peer solicitation, signatory assignment, board member cultivation, but not solicitation, or board member solicitation. It can be used to assign a board member to send a thank you letter, or simply to indicate that a board member wishes to be notified when a gift is received. Tasks and contacts. Philosophically speaking, the difference between a task and a contact is execution. However your database manages these transactional, date-driven activities, define and document a simple, again, stressing the word simple, method for recording all contacts with the donor and differentiating between the most meaningful in terms of cultivation.
So these must-have codes, as well as the processes that they support, are really the core of a Major Gifts implementation. Easy, right? I know that in several places in the presentation, I mentioned that some of the key concepts are discussed in more detail elsewhere, but I have created a list of the codes and some of the more common field values as a download at the link on this post.